The U Street corridor glows in the Washington, D.C. evening, once known as the Black Broadway, the heart of the capital city's music scene. Over 3 days in May 1965, something special happened in the basement jazz club called Bohemian Caverns. From this stage, the Ramsey Lewis Trio recorded an album. One song was added to the set list at the last minute. It became a breakout hit and Lewis's signature for nearly 50 years. In his hometown of Chicago, at one of his favorite recording studios, Ramsey Lewis, now 77 and just back from a West Coast swing, sat down with us. We began with a chance encounter in 1965 that would change his life.
So we were sitting in this little coffee shop in Washington, D.C., and the waitress came over. "What are you guys doing?" L.D. Young, Red Holt, and myself. "Trying to think of a song that's kind of happy, fun, you know." And she said, "Have you guys heard Dobie Gray's The In Crowd?" L.D. and Red had heard it. I had not heard it. So she said, "We had it in a jukebox." In those days, they had jukeboxes in coffee shops.
Right? Oh, I remember jukeboxes.
Right. She went over and played it. I said, yeah, you know, that's nice. That'll work. I'm in with the in crowd. I go where the in crowd goes. We bought the 45, took it to the hotel. We had a little phonograph and played it, and we learned it. And that was a Monday or Tuesday. Thursday night, it was the first session at the Bohemian Caverns. And we had played all of our big arrangements, and now it's time to close the show. And she said, so Red, the drummer, said, let's end it with that new song, The In Crowd. When we started playing The In Crowd, they started moving and getting up out of their seats and dancing in the aisles. And we looked at each other like, so we still didn't know that it was what it was going to be.
The hit that it became,
No.
went up the pop charts, and I'm just saying, we wore that record out in our house in
Did
Chicago. The In Crowd became the #5 pop hit in the country in October 1965, and it earned Ramsey Lewis the first of 3 Grammys and 7 gold records. Just recently, we caught up with you at another club, this one in San Diego. One of the songs you played during the set was The In Crowd. What's the difference between Ramsey at 30 and Ramsey Lewis at 77?
Well, you know, I try not to relive the past. I know people want to hear The In Crowd. Okay.
Still makes me bop.
Don't forget now, it brings back wonderful memories. Sure. Because with the advent of The In Crowd being a hit record, I no longer had to look at the prices on this side of the menu before I looked at what do I really want to order. After The In Crowd?
Success.
Right. But I just love the piano. I think I must have been about 12 or 13 years old when I decided I like the feel, the touch. And Dorothy Mendelsohn, my piano teacher, she was the second piano teacher. She's the one who started saying, "Ramsey, listen with your inner ear." 12, 13 years old, what inner ear? Where's the inner ear? Listen from within. So now this introduction to this listening from within, etc., got me hooked. You know, it was a chore the first 4 or 5 years because Dad would come home from work and ask my mom, they call me Sonny, "Did Sonny practice today?" And if she said no,
that was a bad evening, huh? Okay. Talk a bit about your dad. I mean, as it turns out, just by coincidence, the other gentleman we're interviewing for this show is also a junior. And he said his dad was a perfectionist and that it was tough growing up with that. So describe your dad.
Dad had a wonderful voice. He could sing. He could sing his heart out. Everybody just loved his singing. He was very active in church music. And he became our gospel choir director.
You grew up around a lot of gospel.
Grew up around gospel music because I was 9 years old. Dad saying, "You're going to start playing for the church service for our gospel choir."
Lewis spent part of his childhood at the Cabrini row houses on Chicago's near North Side. a neighborhood that would later feature the notorious Cabrini Green housing projects. But for young Ramsey, it was a childhood filled with all kinds of music. At one point, the teacher said she wasn't so sure that as a black person you could make a living playing classical. Talk about that and what at the time you thought about that comment.
It was after we had switched from our neighborhood piano teacher to Dorothy Mendelson, who taught at Chicago Musical College. She thought I had a lot of talent. About 16 years old, 15, 16 years old, I had this opportunity to play with a jazz band. And she said, well, Mrs. Lewis, I think that it's an opportunity that Ramsey should pursue, because in this day and time, as you know, it's not easy for African Americans to make a living professionally in music. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was Marian Anderson, Paul Robeson. I mean, you count on one hand.
Right, exactly. The people who were making
it in classical music. Sure. Right.
Ramsey Lewis was already in his 70s when he was asked to step out of his comfort zone to compose a solo piano piece. That led to an evening-length work with the Joffrey Ballet, and eventually to the Kennedy Center in Washington to perform a composition that he calls the most satisfying work of his life.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ramsey Lewis.
You've done the Joffrey Ballet, and then they say, okay, how about doing a 2-hour evening piece based on Abraham Lincoln for the bicentennial of his birth? And you said...
Okay. But I might have said it too quickly. Because when I got home and I started thinking about it, I said, wait a minute. The Abraham Lincoln, right?
Right. You did a lot of research. You traveled places. You wanted to understand.
That's right. I went to Springfield, Illinois, and I read books, and to the point where I could see his life in my mind.
But talk about one of the things that struck you. You read that Lincoln had gone to a slave auction, and you wanted to do something with that. So talk about when you came across that.
When I read that, the part where he was working on this boat going down the Mississippi, and the boat pulled over to the side where there was this auctioning off of slaves, and they had a family of 4, mother, father, a little boy, and a little girl. Mm-hmm. And he witnessed these people who were treating them like a piece of furniture, whatever, you know. And that stayed with me, and the kind of music just was, I couldn't get dark enough. In fact, I started more up here. And my wife is the one who said, no, it's not dark enough. It's not dark enough. And I would get down in this part of the piano, and it worked very, very well.
It was a multimedia presentation, and it happened to coincide with a couple of other momentous things, including the election of the first black president. And so the end of the piece changed, didn't it?
Well, when I started, Barack Obama was running. When I finished, he had become president of the United States, which was a good thing because it allowed me to end the piece on a more
hopeful. It didn't have to be so dark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But in the middle of that, you had a major health crisis.
Big concern was pancreatic cancer. Fortunately, there was no malignancy. It wasn't cancer.
Sure. You've said that having that sort of health crisis really gave you a whole new sense of appreciation of things. What do you mean by that?
Well, appreciation of simple things, appreciation of life, appreciation of the moment, being in the moment. You know, many times we go through life reliving what we should have, would have, could have, couldn't have done, or what we ought to do. And a lot of people, I got to tell you, a lot of people go through much of their life. If you go back over the year of their past life, I bet you months, if you add up all the hours that they're daydreaming and what
right.
if, and I shouldn't have, I could have.
That they're not they're not living.
They're not living. Because you can only live in this moment.
I know you're very involved, in a number of programs. So let's just talk about music in schools, for example, and your concerns there. And I know you've been back to your elementary school dinner, and you say every time you do go back or do that kind of thing, you're worried because often music is one of the first things to be cut.
And especially in today's inner city. I grew up and went to a high school in Chicago's inner city.
Wells, is that the?
Wells High School. And you won't believe that this is a high school in the inner city when I tell you that we had an orchestra with all the instruments we needed. We had a marching band, a concert band, all the instruments we needed. I think, the reason we're not getting the Sarah Vaughns and the Ella Fitzgeralds and the Oscar Petersons that we used to get is because kids only hear from each other.
People often refer, as a jazz pianist, but what do you prefer? What words would you like, the label for Ramsey Lewis?
I don't like labels, but whatever fits, whatever the person can choose, whatever he or she chooses. Jazz musician, jazz pianist, jazz composer, but probably musician. A musician
Right.
is able to make music and not just play notes. Use dynamics, use proper phrasing. How do you phrase a melody? Soft, loud. Music to me is made up of many elements. So musician, I like.
You like.
And then piano player and composer. Father, husband.
The musician who says he practices staying in the moment. His advice? Give the best of yourself right now, and doors will open to wonderful things not yet dreamed.